systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of the Wednesday PGA show here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube station. No Hoop this week. He's out, so I did bring in a special guest. Got my guy Alex Blickel, head of DFS over at FTN. Bring him in here in a second, but before we get into it, want to remind everyone on the way in, subscribe to the channel. We passed the 6K mark. We're headed for 7. Once we get there, we'll be giving away another annual PGA membership, so keep that in mind. And then real quickly, just want to let everybody know, because it was talked about more than enough. It's on our Twitter, X, whatever account you want to go to. We will announce the annual winner later from our guy Mark, but we did launch MLB only. So I'm going to bring it up quickly, cover my guy Alex. I'll bring him back in just 2 seconds. We got a lot to talk about today, to Scottie or not to Scottie, the weather. We're going to talk his golf pro career, everything he's got going on over at FTN. Just a lot of fun stuff. But real quick, you asked for it. We delivered. We posted that out this morning. We had more than enough people reach out and ask about MLB only and why sites charge $100 a month for every sport, but you can't just get this over the summer. So we did launch it. You could try out the week for $14. It's all the stuff you don't expect from us: projections, ownership, the pitcher and hitter rankings, the stack rankings. You can go to the testimonials on the main page and see everything that we offer there, the education course, all of that included. But $39 a month drops to $33 with code MLB15. So you use the code. And then if you want to go for the season, that is including the World Series, right through the playoffs, the World Series, everything, that'll drop down to $195. So less than $200. It's all inclusive. You'll get in the Discord with the monthly or the season pass. That's going to do it, though, for that one, guys. If you want to use the code, use MLB15. Alex, thank you so much for joining us this week and helping out, man. You were first to jump up and hop in the ring, willing to do either or. I thought this would be a good one to do. It's a fun week. You guys got a lot of fun stuff going on over there, but talk to me, man. Let the people know a little bit about yourself and how you're doing so far.
Hey, I love that you started with some MLB stuff. We're pumped for MLB as well. We just built a brand new pick'em tool over at FTN Daily. And if you ever played Prize Picks, it's kind of overwhelming. You get onto the site and there are a million different props you can choose from. You don't know which ones to pick. And then you don't know, should I do a 2-pick play, a 5-pick play, 6-pick? So we've got all of that content you could possibly need over at FTN. And the tool kind of tells you the correlation of the play as well. So you know whether the play itself is really good and not just the individual picks. But yeah, it's been a really fun PGA season over at FTN. I think the biggest thing for us has been the introduction of these GPP scores, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But basically just saying who's over-owned, who's under-owned on each slate. We've got a really strong course fit model as well. So it's been a fun year.
Yeah, we're going to get to that too. We're not going to have the keeper cut today with no hoop, but I got something other special for you. We're going to do a little bit of a recap last week. I do want to dig into that a little bit, but for those that don't know you, Alex, I told the story today on the Mayo in studio show. So you obviously have a pro golf career and everything you've got going on with that. We'll go into that in a second, but at the DFS Open, for those that don't know what it was like a bunch of the DFS community got together, went out to an event. It was the Honda Classic, the year Sung J M won, my boy, in Florida. But just to note, Alex made the playoffs. So he wins both the long drive contests at the event, and then it's him and this other guy in the playoff, and Kenny Kim and myself, the Fantasy Golf Degenerates, we strap up in the thing. We're like, we're going back. We're going to watch this playoff. It was actually really cool. Super excited. You're very good. This guy was good. It was like down to the real golfers now. Now all got rid of all the scraps, and rough tee shot for our boy Alex here, but it's still a lot of fun. Awesome event that we had there. But talk to people a little bit about that. You obviously have a pro golfer. You're still playing some events. I know it was just a couple of years ago. I think you won either a state event or something like that, but just let the people know a little bit about that background.
Man, that event was so much fun, that DFS Open. I really hope we start doing it again. Obviously, it got kind of thrown out the window with COVID and everything, but hopefully it comes back eventually, because that was a blast. So yeah, I've been a professional since I graduated from college in 2015. And as you mentioned, biggest win came a couple of years ago in the Pennsylvania Open. We'll actually talk a little bit about that when we talk about Cam Young and that, guys trying to close, maybe choking events, things of that nature. It's going to be a really fun discussion. And that summer was a really interesting one for myself too.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key. We're going to recap that. We can actually hop into it now. I mean, I talked on the Mayo show about it today. I said you and I would talk about it. We were chatting over the DM just back and forth. I said, we'll save it for the show. I think it's actually, and like you're going to give insight today on weather. You're going to give insight today on my thing that I always talk about, the PM AM wave split, whether there's weather or not. I'm always curious about how people feel about that, especially out there golfing the way you have, and you go to US Open qualifier events and different things like that. I think you're still playing those, but just real quick on that, it was like the closer versus the choker, right? I want to know from the chat, do you think Cam Young is a closer or a choker? I mean, this is my take here, Alex, and I'll let you kick it off. The guy, like, to me, Keith Mitchell choked. He had a 2-shot lead. He wakes up out of bed. He has to go out and close this thing out, but he has 18 holes in front of him with a 2-stroke buffer. That's not very much on the PGA. These guys are very good. You know this. I know this. Everyone here knows this. But you look at, Cam Young, he shoots a 68. It's not like the worst score ever at that course, but the setup of he needed a 66 even to make a playoff in the end, being results-oriented. To get in the playoff, he would have needed a 66 to get in there with Malnati, and then you still may or may not win in that playoff. So just give me your take on the closer versus choker segment here.
I'm a data guy at heart. Like, I'm an analytics guy, but I don't think you want my opinion as an analytics guy. You want my opinion as a player, and it just so happens that they're kind of the same. And so the way that I'll answer this is, in that summer, 2021, I started my season in the Vermont Open. I was in second place going into the final round, and I was 8 over par through 10 holes, just pissing down my leg, playing terribly. Like, I'm the quality of golfer that I am because of the way that I drive the ball. And that day, every tee shot in the trees, making a mess of every hole. Like, I was a quote unquote choker that day. Then a couple weeks later, I go to the Midwest Golf Tour, really strong mini tour event. And I take a 4-shot lead into the final round. And I'm playing with a guy who was one of the absolute best mini tour players, just unbelievable ball striker, every single iron as flush as can be. It's a pretty tough golf course to the point where, like, anything under par is good, right? And I shoot 1 under on the front. He shoots 4 under. Just, he's unbelievable. He's unconscious. And I play the back 9 3 under to win by 3. So I go from complete choker to getting it done under pressure, challenged by one of the better players. A couple weeks later, I go to the New Hampshire Open. I didn't just play 8 bad holes in contention. I was in third going into the final round after a walk-off albatross at the end of the second round, which was pretty awesome. So I go into the final round of third. I didn't just play a bad 8 holes. I played 18 horrible holes of golf. I think I went from like 3rd to 50th. Like, it was comically bad. And then a month later, I win the Pennsylvania Open. Biggest win of my life. For anyone who doesn't know, like, these state opens are really kind of cool. They're really important. And for me, the Pennsylvania Open is like my Masters every year. I don't get to play in the real Masters, so that's my Masters, and I get it done there. So my question is, who was I? Was I a choker, or was I somebody who can always get it done under the gun? Because I had 2 wins and I had 2 absolutely atrocious showings, one in contention. So my take is pretty much, we never really know. We can say from a data perspective when somebody has the skill of knowing how to win. Cam Smith, Sam Burns, those guys, when they're in contention, they're going to close it out. They're going to win at an above average, an above expectation rate. But when guys haven't gotten it done, we can't say that they won't get it done. And I think a big thing there is we spend way too much time looking at whether a guy has won or not, or how often he wins when in contention, and not how well did he play. Cam Young this week is a perfect example. I love the fact that you made the distinction between he and Keith Mitchell. Cam Young, like, there's been a lot of talk, he couldn't even get it done against Peter Malnati. Malnati shot 4 under on a really difficult golf course, starting the day 1 ahead of Cam Young. It would have taken a hell of a performance from Cam to get that win. You can't hold that against him.
Yeah, I typically feel the same way. Like I said, that's kind of the setup of that one, where it's like, I know that's what people are going to say, can't even beat Peter Malnati, but it's like, that's just the way the game goes some days. It's, you see it all the time. I will say it's going to come up because obviously when we get to Scheffler, that's going to be the big conversation. Everyone wants to know about Wyndham Clark and weather. We're going to cover all that stuff. We always do. Did way less marketing for you guys today just so we could get to this type of stuff. I think this is much more interesting. Talk through it, and then we'll get to the slate at hand. But just of note, like, I also sometimes ask about this. Like, again, it's not the same. You go out, you control your golf game. DFS, you control your golf lineup builds. But then it's what you said, like that 3rd to 50th is so reminiscent of someone who thinks, I got the sweat Saturday night. Cut Sweat says I'm at this. Shout out Cut Sweats and Nelson Adcock doing the good things over there. But you're like, I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden it's the worst round ever and you fall out completely. Like that happens all the time. And it doesn't really matter the event you're in, big, small, if you play pro, casual, whatever. I think lots of people out there have had that. Do you have any comparisons at all, being that you play a lot of DFS and have success with it, as well as play golf like you do, where you can make any comparisons to the two being individual, quote unquote, games, sports, right? In a sense.
I think the biggest thing is golf really prepared me for how process focused you have to be in DFS, where if you're obsessing about the results, about, oh, I got third instead of first, and you're just like sweating way too much about that, you're going to end up trying to force things in your life. You're going to, maybe play a little bit more than you should one week, just trying to force good results. And all we can do is focus on the process and just let the results come.
Yeah, I agree. And that's part of it. Like that was what Mayo said today, around this conversation. He said about Xander, right? Xander, he was doing his unofficial Mayo Golf World rankings because of how messed up it is in the world of golf right now and all that stuff. I'll probably, we can get back on another show sometime and talk through that stuff. But just in general, he said, like, man, the guy's in contention all the time. He just doesn't have it. So, people will say that he's no good, but what will happen the minute he gets one, everyone will say, well, yeah, of course he does. Look how often he's been in contention. It's like the opposite side of how they're putting it the other way. It's like right now, couldn't close a front door or whatever you want to call it. And once he wins one, people will say, well, that's how you win. You put yourself in contention. Eventually it's going to go your way. It's all we're trying to do. It's not the same, but to relate it to a DFS perspective is to try and be like, that's the key point of focusing on process, not just picks and plays that you got to hope that the person that you follow always has the best picks. That's going to be so unlikely. What you have to do is build a process that's repeatable so that you can continuously put it out there and then wait for your turn. We had someone say a couple of weeks ago, like, oh man, 3 bad weeks for me in golf. It's like, I know people have 3 bad months. I've had 3 bad months before at PGA DFS. Like it's insane. And you see it with golfers, and it's not comparing now, but just say you see people go horrible for a year. Ricky Fowler, and then comes out and eventually wins at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. Jason Day was down and he's back up. Spieth was down and he's up. JT down and up. It happens to all these guys, and it's just different times in their life. But one guy that's on top of it right now is Scottie Scheffler, and we'll get to him here shortly, Alex. But I do want to get your take on this. First off, we always talk the weather quickly. I'm not sure if you're seeing the same stuff, but for this event right now, everyone's starting to talk about it on golf Twitter. You're seeing it start to get posted out on some of the other shows. A little conversation between Mayo and I today about it, but it looks like no wind really at all on Thursday. Again, it's Texas. Things can happen definitely when the wind comes out, but on Friday, definitely looks like a lot of winds after about lunchtime. And then, maybe talk a little bit to weather, temperatures, and then also just the gusts, like what really matters, right? So if you say, oh, it's 10 to 15 sustained, it's fine, but gusts of 25 plus, it matters. Give us your take on that stuff as well, and then talk about the weather for this week that you see at hand.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff in this weather. I think the first thing I'll say is it's going to be pretty cold Thursday morning, so ball doesn't carry anywhere near as far. Plus, you then have to make a within-round adjustment once it does warm up. Like, okay, 140 was my pitching wedge 2 holes ago. Now it's going to be a gap wedge. 2 holes later, it might be a half-swing gap wedge. So it's a little bit tougher to make that adjustment when you're starting in the cold, like 50 degrees flat is what I'm seeing, maybe even 47 degrees for when some of those guys are going to tee off. Friday, the wind, sustained winds are tough, but the gusts are what make it really difficult, because then you not only have to deal with the ball being affected by the wind, but now you're also guessing about, okay, how is it going to affect it? Is it, I'm feeling a gust of 20, but up in the air, is it only 10? When it's up in the air, is it the same direction that I'm feeling on my face? Or we see all the time, like on 17 at the Players at Sawgrass, where they show it's like it's in from the right at 7 miles an hour in the player's face, but up in the air, it's downwind at 11 miles an hour, something like that. So that's what makes it so difficult to handle wind. Is it's not just the way the ball is affecting, or the way the wind is affecting the ball in the air, but it's also, you have to be right about how it's going to affect the ball.
Yeah, you talked about just the the stuff more about than most out there. Like you said, talk about switching clubs and which swing level you're going with it now, with which club, etc. But then you add in what you hear a lot of pros talk about is the sustained is much better, because at least they know what the wind is. It's when it's going all over the place and changing up on them that they start to get frustrated, because I thought this, my caddy thought that, we agreed on this, and then this happened anyway, and it all went out the window. So it gets pretty tricky when it comes to that. Anything like, do you see a slight PM AM wave advantage here? Like that's what I think a lot of people are starting to look at right now. I'm not sure if you see that for this week. And then also, we'll talk about that first. Then I do want to get a quick take on the PMAM angle.
Yeah, I do think I see a bit of an edge there. The other thing I'll say is sometimes I think people are a little bit too quick to see some wind and just assume that that's going to be bad. Like sometimes if the course is starting out really soft, a little bit of wind drying up the course a bit can actually be advantageous because it means drives are going to run out an extra 20 yards or something like that. So you're shortening the course. Plus you get some holes where it's like, oh, this is really difficult hole typically, but today it's perfectly downwind. So now that hole that usually plays at 4.5 is going to play at 4.0, things of that nature. So it's not as simple as there's wind, it's going to be tougher, there's going to be a wave advantage, but oftentimes it is, and I don't have the information to know exactly, what wind direction is easy or not. On this golf course, there are some where it's like, oh man, we've got a big edge today because it's an east wind, so we know that the wind is going to help them or something like that. This is not the case. We've only got 3 years worth of data on this golf course, plus now we're playing at a different time of year, so kind of there's more uncertainty this week than most.
Yeah, and then the chat's already talking about Scottie and the quote-unquote bad wave. And I'm not sure if you know, but do you think Scottie's ever seen Texas winds before? Think he knows how to get around those? Because I'm pretty sure no one's going to care about that. Scottie's going to be extremely owned. We'll go there in just a second, guys. But just real quick, the PMAM thing I always talk about. So I will get this sort of your last golf take here, and then we can keep it going with the slate. But I'm not a pro golfer. I've never played any of these tournaments that you're in, all that. And I know that when a golfer goes out on Friday morning, they still have an idea of the number they got to hit. They're saying it's probably 1 under, 2 under. You hear them talk about interviews all the time. Probably got to get to 200 today and I'm good, or whatever they say for whatever event. But the thought of just going out and being able to set the tone and almost being a part of setting that number versus in the afternoon when it's like pretty clear cut now. Everyone's saying, yeah, it's looking like it's going to be 2 under. You got to get to that number. You're 2 under with 5 holes to play. And like last week, you got the snake pit in front of you, or you got something like that. Man, you cannot, in my head, you're thinking about just compounding mistakes and you're compounding a sort of negative mentality. You have to be very strong-willed to play golf in the first place. But just to say it where one mistake and you start to feel like now I'm screwed because I got to just get it back. Or I always say this every year at Torrey Pines, north-south. Everyone always says, oh, get out on the north, set a nice low score, get to 5 under, and then just hope to be alive on the south on Friday. It's like, well, what about the guys that just crush it on Friday at the south? How good does that feel to know you're playing the north the next day? That's not really a PMAM, but just give me thoughts on mentality from that type of perspective. I am curious.
Man, it's so hard to get to the tour that I think people don't realize merely by the fact that they are on the tour and playing these events, they have already proven that they can handle pressure really well and they play well under pressure. A lot of guys even will probably say that they play best under pressure. So I don't necessarily agree with that angle, but where I do think that there's an edge to the PM-AM split is that nobody likes to wait, right? If you finish your round early Thursday, you're done by lunchtime, you've got over 24 hours before you get to tee up again. That wait is really annoying at minimum, and it can be difficult to stay in rhythm, like particularly if you played well. Maybe it's even a case that, someone who went out and shot 3 over and was really disappointed with the round, maybe they are then more likely to turn it around the next day if they had that wait. But there's nothing better than playing well Thursday afternoon, sleeping, waking up, and just being able to get right back out there and trying to continue that momentum. So I think that's an area where the PM-AM split absolutely is helpful.
I'm going to take it as a W. I've been right all along. I'm going to say, I do appreciate the insight. It kind of makes sense. I was just curious, like you just said, sleeping on it after a good round and then waking up early. But part of that is, like you said, staying in rhythm, knowing it's all good. And even for the guys that, they get written off on day one all the time. Oh, that guy sucks, man. He shot a 5 over, and it's a course where like even is probably the cut or 1 over is the cut. They're not that far off. They just need to flip the round. The same guy that had 4 under on day one can go out and shoot a 4 over and land it even. Like they can go 4 over to 4 under and go even that way. So, and then see where they find themselves over the weekend. So definitely some good insight. Definitely appreciate that. Let's move on. Let's have this Scottie conversation. And I guess, is there anything you want to talk about this course before quickly? Because you mentioned about 3 years history, the players playing, mentioning already about playing it at a different time of the year, a lot of bomber conversation. So I guess we should have that first and then we can apply it. I'll get there, guys. Don't worry. I promise. I'm really intrigued here by this conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah. There are 2 things that stand out to me about this golf course. The first is from these 3 years, we have gotten some extra signal on driving distance and a less than typical signal on driving accuracy. We, by the way, use a proprietary strokes gained driving accuracy metric. So not your typical, percentage of fairways hit, which personally I think is one of the worst statistics in all of sports, let alone golf. But we get a little bit less signal than usual on that driving accuracy metric. And then the surprising one is a big increase on around the green signal here. I'm not sure that's going to continue to this season. My co-host on Pro V Pro, another former pro golfer, Justin Bates, he's always big on grass type and looking at grass type around the green play. The overseed that we're going to see this year, it's definitely a lot easier to chip off of. It's just so much easier to make good contact than the grainy Bermuda that they've played previously here. So maybe we'll get slightly less of an around the green impact, but I think if anything, we're going to get an even larger lean into driving distance and away from driving accuracy, because it sounds like the rough is going to be pretty easy to play out of this week.
Yeah, and just heard the news before hopping on. Everyone was going on about the Wyndham Clark and the back and everything, and then one of his quotes was literally like kind of a bad week to have this sort of minor injury because the setup of it's just bomb and gouge basically is what he said. Get it out there and see what happens. So I think that is definitely going to be a common theme. Sounds like people are definitely loving it. This guy, Hoop should be booted. No, we got to keep Hoop in the mix. It's my guy, but I definitely appreciate Alex, and I love doing stuff like this. So maybe more on that in the future. But for today, we'll get to it, and let's finally do this. What they've been all waiting for. Let's talk about Jimmy Stanger and his recent performances. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what people want to talk about. Let's talk about Scottie Scheffler, and just so people watching know, we do know the winner of the annual membership. We did the random, so we have the winner of the annual membership. We'll announce that later on in the show, but let's talk about Scottie. I always, I call it a Tambo tangent. I made that up today, but basically just go on about this because there's two things. One, he's 13K, so he has to win or he's useless. So you can't, if he doesn't win, you don't need Scottie Scheffler. That's the first conversation. Second one is around, just the general piece of people almost have like a broken app or a broken, DraftKings site or whatever. Like it's all in or fade. There is no in between. You're not allowed to play him 26%. You can't play him 75%. It's just lock or fade. What are we doing with Scottie? It's like the automatic first thought. So let's talk about it from that perspective. And then you can apply it. I mean, you've got I want to hear about the GPP scores. I want to hear about sort of what you think when it comes to that stuff. And then we'll go through the upper tier, including Wyndham's injury. We'll talk about Thigala and Zalatoris. But first take on the two items of lock or fade. Do you have to, sort of go there? I think I know the answer, but I'll get your take. And then also the first part that I was talking about as well.
It's interesting because we were having this conversation in our Discord on FTN earlier today, and we do ownership for both single entry and MME contests. And I'm a big believer that small changes in ownership can lead to big changes in the optimal strategy. If I had to guess right now, I would say I am fading Scottie in single entry and playing 100% Scottie in MME, because we have him at 46% in MME, 56% in single entry. And to me, the turning point is somewhere in between there, probably 50-51%, almost exactly in between. So I think fade on single entry, play in MME.
Okay. I like that take. What do the GPP scores entail? Maybe just talk a little bit about that as well, and then how you would apply that when it comes to something like this situation.
Where I'll start is talking about even different DFS sports. So if you think about like Christian McCaffrey in NFL DFS, he is going to help your lineup. He's going to help you get takedowns far more often than he's going to sink your lineup. And this is also true of like the $4,000 point guard in NBA who's going to play 35 minutes in Tyrese Halliburton's absence or something like that, right?
Yep.
In golf, now Scottie's a bit of an exception here, but the vast majority of players are more likely to fail, which we can define pretty easily as a miscut, than they are to deliver some kind of ceiling performance, which I define as somewhere between a top 5 and a top 10, depending on the player's price. So for example, I think one of the best examples of bad chalk this year was Eric Cole at the Cognizant. He was, I think, 27%. And we had him at 10% for a top 5 and 30% for a miscut. So literally 3 times as likely to fail as to give you the type of ceiling performance that you need to help you take down the tournament. Like that to me just screams fade. And I think one of the reasons why the GPP scores do a really good job of this is that it's not just about what the players in your lineup do. It's also about what the players that aren't in your lineup do. And the easiest weeks to get a takedown in PGA are when you have a 6 for 6 and only 5% of the field does, right? So you need chalk to fail to improve your odds of getting a takedown. And if you're playing a 27% guy who's 30% likely to miss the cut, then you are sacrificing the opportunity to be on the correct side of a major chalk piece failing and tanking, the 6 for 6, maybe from 15% to 5%.
So I will say this, I really love the CMC sort of analogy that you put up there, because I can really relate to that. I think lots of people that play PGA DFS typically sort of run it like, even myself back when I was working full time and in the car dealerships at the different places I worked at, I was like, it was nice about PGA and NFL to have this sort of weekend sports that you could just do in the evenings, get ready for it. And I do think that's a good example. And okay, so Billy says is actually a poor example. Despite scoring that, he actively hurt you all but 3 weeks because at 10K you need 40 from him.
You don't, though.
That's not true. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think that's a misconception, because it's not just about what he does. It's about what your lineup as a whole does. And so if he gives you 25 and you get the contrarian upside wide receiver at 5K with the 100-yard 2-touchdown game, like that's the piece that's going to win you tournaments. You're not asking CMC to win you the week. Just like we're not necessarily asking Scheffler to win us the week this week. We might just be asking him to do well enough such that if we have, let's say, Bo Hostler at 7% and $8,700, and he gets second place and is a huge piece, who are we surrounding him with? What probability are the guys around him to have success? And in that case, that's where Scheffler can be a good play too.
And so it worked out even better, because you sort of said what I was about to say from Billy's comment. I mean, Billy might be throwing that out there as what we're making fun of with the Scottie stuff, where it's like you just said, it's not what Scottie does as much as what everyone does around him, where it gets so confused as people say he has to win in order to be there. We literally just saw last week Xander, who, by the way, did not need that T5 run. He could have finished 10th or 12th probably and did a little bit of a run, but not the big one, and still been involved because it was just the way the week set up. It's what did the others do around him. So you really got to think it's not about necessarily just Scottie, but first off, what does Wyndham, Thigala, and Zal and some of those other guys mean to you? Are they close to him or not? Like, how do you see it? That's how you got to portray it, first of all. Second of all, and I talked about this on the show earlier with Mayo, and as the week went on, it was more clear to me kind of your MME approach that I don't lock, but I do like going a little bit overweight or enough overweight, and like a Rahm at the Mexico Open, or back in the day, you'd have guys at, who was it? Was it DJ at the RBC Canadian Open? I forget who was always crushing it there, but like that type of setup where at least I'd consider it. The thing is here, we have a ton of guys from 7,500 and below, which is sort of the sweet spot of where you're going to end up in Scottie lineup. So I kind of like your single entry versus MME take because of that. Let's flip it and ask, because I mean, that's a lot on Scottie. If other people have stuff, we could talk about it. It's like, that's a really good breakdown, I think, for how you should handle it. But real quick, the next topic that comes up with this, and why we'll spend more time at the top this week, is not just the Clark injury. I'll go there in a second, but Scottie Scheffler's win equity is enormous, right? He's a 3-1 favorite. It is like Rahm in Mexico back in the day, stuff like that. But like Tony Finau took down Rahm in Mexico that year, one year, that was second the other year, first the year after. So the question I would have is, if you're not starting with Scottie in single entry, not who your picks are, what's not what we do here, but of knowing that you're taking that much win equity out of your lineup, how are you making up for it? Or what's sort of your game plan process-wise going in, knowing that that's missing? In theory, though, the whole point is, if you're saying he's not winning, then that win equity doesn't actually truly exist. So therefore, the other stuff. But go ahead. Let's talk about that a little bit as well.
Where I'll start is that our models almost think that 3-1 shows value on him. We've got him at 26.2% to win. I can't remember a number even getting close to that. Like, this is nuts. Not just how well he's playing, but also then you throw him in a field like this, and of course that kind of fits him. I mean, I don't think people realize that he's number one in our strokes gained around the green projection this week. Like, the guy isn't just dominant ball striking. His short game is also potentially the best in the world. He's just unbelievable tee to green. But yeah, it's a really good question. If you're not going there, how do you make up for it? I think the way you make up for it is made cut odds. Like, you have to, if you're not playing Scottie, you have to try and win this week by having a solid 6 for 6 where everybody does well. And maybe you don't have the winner, but maybe you have 4 guys in the top 10 or something like that. And there are ways where you can build a really strong just lineup of made cut odds where it doesn't include Scottie, but like even there, he's got a enormous advantage, almost a 13 percentage point advantage over the second most likely to make the cut, which is Wyndham Clark at 78.5%. We've got Scottie at 92, which again is just stupid high.
I don't even think you can make this work, Nick. Like you said, it's like 26, 27% in a lot of places. Technically, obviously you can. There's 74% out there. I'm saying, but also salary constraints, right? So I didn't look at it to give the true answer, but my point of saying about the salary constraints matter. I'm not sure if you'll be able to get there, but I like what Alex said. I would lean that angle as well from a DFS perspective of saying, then you really got to hope. Remember, there's two angles to this too. And I joked about this one with Mayo today, but like there's a lot of Scottie lineups that are going to bust because of what you have to force in to make it all work. Even people that say, well, I know Scottie's going to be 40%. Let me get a bunch of him and like, let me lock him in and get a bunch of guys around him. And what they're going to do is get a bunch of different roster constructions, a bunch of different punt plays where a lot of those turn into 5-6, 4-6, maybe 3-6 or worse. And then those lineups are all dead too. So then it cuts the Scottie number down. Maybe I'm going to call him Scorty now because Scottie's going to be 40, but I don't know if he's actually going to be 40%. I'll ask you that as the last question. What do you think his ownership's actually going to come in at in like the large field? And what do you think it's going to be in the small field?
I was about to ask you the exact same question. I think
you mentioned a couple numbers though. I think you said like maybe 42 or 56. Like Mayo thought he could push 65 to 70. That's why I asked in single entry, smaller field.
So I've got him at 47% in MME right now and 56% in single entry. And that single entry is for like the big $12 single entry, or could even apply to the Mayo, or I guess that contest doesn't exist anymore, but what used to be the Pat Mayo Open. In higher stakes, I think it like the $200 single entry with 277 people is my favorite contest to do each week. I think there he could be 60 to 65, no problem. I think one thing that's worth noting about this week's pricing is, Scottie's at 13, but then there's over a $2,000 gap to the next guy. And there are only, I believe, 13 players above the average price per player in a lineup this week, like 83, 33 or something like that. So it's actually going to be fairly easy for people to add Scottie, which is why I think his ownership is going to be much higher than we've seen anybody else this year. And that's why for me in single entry, like he's just such an easy click that I think I'm going to fade him in single entry.
And the thing too, I think last thing on it, and we'll talk Clark's injury and Theegala Zalatoris, but if he ends up coming in at 48 and just surprises you completely, you, like you said, like it's probably not crossing 50. I know that, splitting hairs between 48 and 51, who gives a shit? I always say that's whatever. But the good news is at least you'll be, if you were locked in and you're all in on him, you still have leverage. You still have double the field on that spot. So you have to feel pretty good about it if that does trend upward. If it goes down, you're not mad because then you thought he actually should have been closer to that number and you went out because he's 41 and you're like, wow, I got him at this. And then for those fading him, I think we gave some good ideas around that. Quick thoughts on the Wyndham Clark stuff, because obviously a lot of people are liking him here, setting up well. I think he was going to be pushing close to 22 to 30. If I want to put a wider range is sort of where I could see him coming in at. Now you got to think with even DraftKings popped on the Q tag, going back to football for a second here, the Q tag got popped on him. What's your take on how that affects Clark? And then give us a quick take on Theegala and Zalatoris.
There's a saying in golf, beware of the sick or injured golfer, which basically says when a guy is thinking about like a nagging injury or an illness, they're not thinking about all the different ways that their next swing could go wrong or something like that. And so it almost can help people. Now, this is probably applies more to, the casual golfer who is the one getting in their own head and making mistakes that way. But I am at least 90% of the time in favor of playing a guy who has some kind of injury or some kind of illness, as long as the ownership is reacting to that. Like we've got him at 34% in single entries, 30% in MME. If that drops to 20% each, I'm going to be playing a lot of Wyndham Clark. If it stays around where it is, I'm not going to play him, but not necessarily because I'm worried about the injury, just because I think that ownership is already too high. So I'm definitely of the case that as long as the guy's teeing it up, I don't really care what he's going through.
Okay. And quick thoughts on Theegala and Zalatoris. I am going to throw one in the chat for sure and let the chat think about this one for a second. We're going to switch it up. Not keep or cut. Choker or closer. So Theegala, man, I felt so bad for the guy at the Waste Management a couple of years ago there when he had it on 17 and it was like trending and then just hard left into the water. But man, I do like this guy. I love his talent. I love his personality. family stuff going out there with his, his mom, his dad, everybody's out there with them. Like, just awesome to see. But talk to me quick on Theegala and Zalatoris to round up this range, and we'll speed it up at some of these other ranges. I'm just more curious to see what people think.
Theegala has been one of our absolute favorites at FTN this season from the start of the year. And at the beginning of the year, it was as simple as he's got one of the highest event-to-event standard deviations of any player on tour. And we're all pretty aware of where like the center of all these guys' distributions are. It's pretty easy to just look at a player's strokes gained, look at their form, and say, okay, he's this good or he's that good. I don't think people pay enough attention to the full range of outcomes for players. His incredibly high volatility gives him a pretty high ceiling. And he's got, I think, 4 top 10s already this year, something like that. So we're seeing it in action. And part of that is because he's turned to one of his biggest weaknesses, or actually his biggest weakness, which was one of the bigger weaknesses of any like upper echelon player on tour, his driving accuracy a year ago. He's turned that into a strength of his. He's now, we have him more accurate than Wyndham Clark off the tee. We have him more accurate than Tony Finau and Jason Day off the tee. He's really come a long, long way in that regard. Every part of his game now is super solid. He's, I think we have him as the second best putter in this field. Like, he's just all around a fantastic golfer now. Still has that volatility, which gives him a really nice ceiling. So I love Theegala pretty much every week. 23% ownership is a little bit high for me, but right now, like, I think there's a good chance he'll be my first guy into single entries if I'm not playing Scottie.
Yeah, and it looks too like Zal is probably coming in under Theegala for maybe what you'd be rating out, but I bet you the ownership's coming in about the same. So any quick thoughts on Zalatoris before we move to these 9Ks?
Yeah, we do have him lower owned than Theegala, but I'm just not as high as most on Zalatoris. I think the biggest reason for that is I tend to care more about around the green play than most people do. And like, for all the crap that Victor Hovland has gotten for his short game, I think there are 2 players who have deserved just as much flack for a bad short game, Zalatoris and Colin Morikawa, and they just haven't received it for some reason. I think part of it is that they also both have a putting issue at times that Hovland hasn't. So like, there's only been one issue that people can steer towards for Hovland. There are 2 that they can go to with Zalatoris and Morikawa, but until Zalatoris' short game gets better, I don't see him, being as successful as people want him to be.
Okay, let's move on. Let's go to this 9K range. We've got Finau down to Tom Hoge. What stands out to you in this range, or what are some of the thoughts you have within these 4? What is there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys? 6 guys, I think.
Have you seen the interview? I'm going to just keep making these football comparisons. Apparently, did you see the interview with Harbaugh today? I
did not yet. No, I was recording earlier at the studio.
He talked about like potentially drafting offensive linemen. Or basically, his point was there's only one unit on a football team that can play well regardless of who else is around them, and that their play affects everybody else. It's the offensive line. And in golf, the same sort of thing exists. There's only one aspect of a player's game that is independent of everything else they do on the course and affects everything else they do on the course, and that is driving the ball. If you drive the ball really well, you're set up for success. So we've been incredibly high on Keith Mitchell for a long time. We're high on him again this week. The surprise in this range for me is that Alex Noren is rating really well for us. He's been solid this year. Hasn't done anything crazy. He's another guy who's just all around a very good player. I think the thing that stands out for me, and I write a hot takes article every Wednesday, and I put this in the article today, which is, in past years, I probably would have said, I don't care that Noren is low owned. He doesn't have the ceiling I'm looking for from an expensive low owned player. My thoughts have kind of evolved on that, which, as I talked about earlier, like, now one of the things I'm trying to do all the time is get a 6 for 6 when everybody else has a low 6 for 6 percentage. Mm-hmm. And Noren is kind of the perfect piece for that. He's 5th in our expected strokes gained. He's 5th in our made cut odds, and he's low owned. So I think he's a really nice contrarian piece, especially if you're not using Scottie and you're going balanced, where you just want like all 6 of your golfers to have a chance to get a top 10.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too. Like, we talked a little bit about him today as a prime example. Like, even again, he can fit in as your 3rd guy, as your 2nd guy, depending on what you want to do down low. But I mean, if you're trying to get away from the Scottie version and use him in that way, then you're fitting in a more balanced build. So he doesn't have to be the driver of that lineup, meaning the guy that actually comes out and wins and gets the job done. It's more of the setup that he's going to be a guy that is really solid, can surprise some people too. It's like you said, you're sort of busting up some of those Scottie, if you're going away from Scottie in this sense, it's you're busting up some of those Scottie lineups that did have to punt a bunch of spots because of the 13K price tag. If you're going with Scottie, it's another way to get different, because then you're saying you pretty much are thinking Scottie or Noren at that point, and you already got a ton of win equity just off of Scottie alone. So I definitely think that's one. Mentioned Finau switching driver. Finau, Mitchell, quick thoughts. Mitchell, any thoughts on him being lower owned coming off that rough Sunday that we talked about earlier?
There are a number of guys this week that I think they have a much wider range of outcomes with their ownership than usual, and Keith is one of them. The other one who I think we should talk about is Jake Knapp. I don't know what to think of Knapp this week, but I don't think Mitchell will be super contrarian, but I also don't see him being anywhere near as popular as he would have been if he had just kind of cruised to a top 5 finish last week, as it kind of looked like he was going to do before he finished birdie eagle to close out the Saturday round.
Yeah, one thing about a guy being a quote-unquote choker to the public view, he coughs up some ownership percentage as well. Typically, you don't really see the same ownership the next week out, so I could definitely agree on that. There's guys in here, like you said, this is sort of the range I would hit on just quickly to talk about the setup of like Finau, Siwoo, Jason Day, Noren, all these guys. It really is going to be interesting to get your take when we get to the 8Ks, because the 8Ks is kind of like the darlings, but starting to see it that I just can't see them getting into as many lineups as maybe I thought to start the week, because it's like Jaeger, Hostler, Rye, Rogers, Gim. These are people usually guys are interested in playing, but I just don't know if that's going to be the case this week. And even if you go with the balanced 9K build, you put a Finau, Day, Noren, or a Day Noren, and then drop down, whatever you end up doing there. If you're going away from Scottie and more balanced, you still almost end up leaving that 8K range. So apply what we talked about to this 8K range with the guys that it looks just like sort of Tony Finau down to Knapp. While there is 2 or 3 guys that probably have little to less ownership, it does look pretty balanced for ownership across the board, at least to me.
Yeah, I would even say that there are more under-owned guys, at least like per capita, in the 8K range than any other range, where it just seems like for whatever reason, a lot of these guys are being skipped over. Bo Hostler, Aaron Rye, Horschel, even Patrick Rogers, who I almost never play. He's got a positive GPP score this week. It just seems like people are going to try and go Scottie and then one of Wyndham, Thigala, Zalatoris, Finau, or Siwoo Kim is somebody that we have projected for more ownership than I think like any other site that I've seen. Hope I'm right about that, because we've got him 4th in expected strokes gained, win probability, and made cut odds. So if he's not more popular than people are expecting, I will be upset that I don't have more of him. But yeah, the 8K range is really, really interesting. And then, man, there's Jake Knapp again, where he could be the best play in this slate. He could be the worst play on this slate.
Explain that further, because I think that we always have the joke, don't sleep on Jake Knapp, but like, that was the week he goes out and wins. And so now it's like, had other good weeks going into that. There was definitely some pieces and some conversations around him, and pieces coming out of content, things where people were talking about his story, which is interesting. But it's like, then it's kind of like he was playing with Rory, and even Rory was making comments on the guy. Like, this guy's solid. He could be very good. And that's why it's kind of funny that you said that. He could be the best, could be the worst. So maybe elaborate on that a little than any of the other GPP scores in this range that pop.
So Knapp's about like 20 yards longer than the average player on tour, which is a huge advantage. I mean, we've got that equating to like 0.4 to 0.5 strokes per round. The problem is, in the last 2 events, he's kind of ditched the driver for what he calls a mini driver, and he's like trying to steer it into play. It looks like he has completely lost his distance advantage. In the last 2 events, he is gaining 0 yards on the field, and he's not become more accurate off the tee. In fact, he's become less accurate. Part of that is he had the 6th hole at Bay Hill where he put 4 in the drink, I think it was. But even if you throw that out of the sample, he hasn't been as accurate in the last 2 weeks as he was prior to that, at least like in his really good 4 or 5 week run, something like that. So we now get to a golf course where it seems like most of the field is aware of the fact that you just want to bomb it and you shouldn't be as concerned about accuracy off the tee. We're coming from 2 courses, particularly Sawgrass, where accuracy was at a premium and distance didn't matter as much. So if Knapp puts the mini driver away and just bombs away the big driver, I think he's one of the better plays on the slate. But then you also have a like I mentioned, Mitchell's ownership had a pretty wide range of outcomes. I think Knapp's is super wide. It wouldn't surprise me if he's under 10% because he's been as bad as he has in the last 2 weeks. It wouldn't surprise me if he's 20%, 25%, because everyone knows, oh, length is important. Knapp is crazy long. So I don't know. Like if you get him using the mini driver at high ownership, you're going to hate yourself. If you get him using the big driver at low ownership, he's the best play on the slate. So I don't know what to do with him.
That's some extra insight there. And I definitely like that breakdown. Again, sometimes that's the unknowns of it all, almost like going back to beware of the injured golfer. We see something, oh, Scotty's neck is screwed. Oh yeah, but then he still wins the tournament. It's like things happen all the time. It can go one way or the other, but same in this, you're not really going to get that much insight typically. So definitely love the breakdown here. A lot of people like it. So this love hearing this kind of info. You and Alex are killing it, bro. Love it. If you guys do love this stuff and want to see more of it, I'm open to it for sure. Love getting on here, talking with my guy Alex, catching up, getting to ask some different insight and be able to apply it to DFS. So make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Always going to try and bring you guys more of this content, try and put one of the better products out there that we can. So I want to make sure of that. So put it in the drink is such an awesome phrase, says Go Collect. Yeah, Jake Knapp did just that quite a few times that day. But like you said, you got to sort of sometimes wipe that out. He was laughing himself. He was smiling at the end of that hole. It's like, what do you do? The guy literally just won on tour. It's like, that's just the way it goes. You win a GPP, the next week you get crushed. It's like, well, it's the way it goes. But that win last week felt pretty good. It's like, it's all you can do is laugh. You definitely have to have a strong mindset. That's another thing I would equate to sort of the DFS versus the golf, not comparing them at all, but mindset wise, I think it's important. You do have to be able to just let things go, move on to the next hole. Same thing in DFS, especially with PGA DFS. You just have to let things go, move on to the next slate. There's showdown slates. There's next week's classic. There's lots of events, and try and have one go your way. So this range, I think, is going to be overlooked. I'll have it in my slate plan up after this. I'll get it done on the site. But just to say it, like besides maybe Horschel, who I could see swing up a little bit, and then people usually do like stuff like Hostler in Texas, so there'll be similar situational stuff there. I think there's going to be at least a bunch of these guys, I will say, should be kept in check. And then guys like Patrick Rogers, and maybe it's Jake Knapp that end up being the ones that come in lower than expected, because Kitayama, I thought, was getting a little bit of a boost as well. Did you have anything on him quick before we go to the sevens?
Yeah, I've got Kitayama and Hughes as the two most popular in this range. And then Doug Gim is also like right there. So I think you said it really well. It's like they're all kind of keeping each other in check, and we're pretty much guaranteed to have a couple of these guys really slip through the cracks.
Yeah, and that was what I was saying earlier, just to go back to the theme of the week, that everyone that missed the Mayo Show or doesn't watch or whatever it might be, that's fine. But like the Scottie lineups are typically going 5, 7K guys, or like a 9K and a 10K, one of a 9K or a 10K guy, and dropping down. And that's where, like you said, in single entry, just get those 6 of 6s. Like again, it's single entry, you get one shot. I'm saying, but get a lineup where you feel you can get a made cut to make it a 6 of 6 was a better way to word it. But just to say where you're like, you know, you're still scared shitless of Scottie Scheffler, of course. But it's like the setup is, as he's pressuring in on Friday afternoon and able to get through, you're hoping that those lineups are busting in at least one, if not two other spots, while you're creeping through with a 6 of 6, where you never know what happens if a guy's feeling good after 2 days and go out and put up a weekend, and Scottie can fall back a little bit in round 3, make it up on round 4, still have that Xander T5, but may not be needed in that case because of the other stuff that happens. Again, we don't know the end of what the puzzle actually looks like until the end of the week when the puzzle is built for us. We all have the same puzzle. We all have the same amount of time, as I always give this analogy, but we have no idea what the final puzzle is supposed to look like. We have an idea of what we're going to want it to look like, and if it ends up that way, it's whoever gets closest to that when the box turns over at the end of all 4 rounds. So definitely like your thoughts in that range. Give me the 7K range. What's some of the guys that stand out here for you?
There are a number of guys in this range. I might even cheat and go into the 6Ks a little bit that stand out to me more for being overowned than anyone stands out as being underowned. I think Taylor Moore is somebody that we were on him both pre-tournament and hit him again live last year when he won the Valspar. So like, he'll always have a great place in my heart, but he seems a little bit overowned to me this week. Joel Damon definitely seems overowned. And then going into the 6K, Sam Ryder and Andrew Novak, both at 6,900, seem a little bit overowned to me. And again, that's not because I don't think they are projecting the best in that range. It's just the difference between the way that they project and everybody else isn't worth the difference in their ownership. Like we've got, both of these guys about 4% chance of a top 5 and like a 45% chance of a missed cut. that shouldn't be 15% owned. So that's why I won't be on those guys. Svensson looks pretty good to me. Ryan Fox looks pretty good. I think Luke List is probably the one who stands out to me the most. He's got the length we want here. The only thing he doesn't have is the short game, but like even his putting has dramatically turned around from what it used to be. A lot of it seems like it's just been, a really hot putter for a week that we can't depend on. But at the very least, we're seeing evidence that he can spike like that with a putter, which we didn't for years.
Yeah, and I think, too, one of the things there, obviously, it's tough, and a week like this could be even tougher, but the setup of a guy like Luke List is you want him just firing away and then hitting those greens, and then we don't need the around-the-green game as much. We need the putts to drop, or sometimes those pars can play out till you get to a hole that you can start to capitalize on. So it's like that's fine, too, if he wants to, put it to 30 feet because he missed the fairway this time, but then he can get that 30-footer close, tap it in. It's like, okay, we'll just move on to the next one. Unless, it's holes that everybody's scoring on, then you sort of start to fall behind. Any quick thoughts for these guys I had on my list to check off? But Ben Griffin, Akshay Bhatia, and Davis Thompson were three guys that were standing out there that I was just curious to get your take on. I haven't finalized anything yet on my end, but just quick thoughts on those three.
Ben Griffin looks really solid. He has a positive GPP score. It's rare to get a positive GPP score, by the way. Most of them are going to be negative because most guys are going to be over-owned. So I like Ben Griffin a lot. Akshay's kind of like right on the line where I think that there are enough guys around him that his ownership is going to be kept in check. We've got him at 12%. If he got to 15, wouldn't really like him. If he gets under 10%, I would definitely like him. Davis Thompson was another one you said, another slightly positive GPP score. So Thompson looks really good. In fact, Thompson is tied with Luke List for our highest strokes gain projection of anybody under $8,000.
Who was that? Sorry, the chat got me here for a second. Who was the last one? I heard the
Davis Thompson.
Yeah, he's still a positive, but then you said one line after that. What was the second part?
The second part of that was that Thompson is actually tied with Luke List for our highest expected strokes gain projection under $8,000.
Which is cool because that's the other interesting part about that area is like Taylor Moore's in that space. Yep. Luke List, who we talk with, Akshay is there. So it's kind of like, how is that actually going to set up? But I definitely think that's a possibility. This is the one that got me. Said if you lost 5 months straight, in PGA DFS, then grew a beard, you already have one, 2 GPPs back to back, would you shave the beard going into the third week? Now, Scottie did look like it could grow back in pretty quickly. So whatever he did, fine. But not sure if you saw that. Obviously, he did trim up the beard. Would you do that, or does that just prove all the people out there that don't want to change their logo in DFS? Like, I can't change my logo. It's lucky. It's like, it doesn't matter. Scottie won the Players last year with no beard, won the Players this year with a beard. Does it matter? He changed his quote-unquote logo, if you will.
Well, listen, I'm the guy who doesn't shave when my Philadelphia teams are in the playoffs until they get eliminated or win. So I would not be shaving like Scottie did.
Okay, so you do. Do you believe, it's not quite the same, but the power of the mush? Do you think Discord chats saying, wow, Scott, this guy's killing it after 9 holes. If he makes 4 birdies, would you say, don't talk about it because now you're going to screw him up? Or do you think it's just whatever happens, happens?
I'm going to cheat with my answer, which is I believe both sides. I get irritated if I see someone mush somebody that I have, but I also think that the reason why we believe in that sort of thing is just confirmation bias.
Yes. And I don't think that Scottie Scheffler, after a hot front 9, is having a rough back 9 because the FTN or the SHIPIT Nation Discord had a conversation around him playing well for that matter. So I always get in shit for that one, but I have some fun with it just to talk about it. Very interesting. This is insane and cannot make this stuff up. So I have to do this right now. But the winner of the draw that got sent to me actually just hopped in here. So Ryan Fedor, or Fedor, however you say it, I apologize, but congrats to Ryan. Ryan actually won. And I will say this, when you do a giveaway that says tag one of your friends who could use this, probably don't tag yourself. It's a member giving back. The goal is to give back. Ryan ended up, I went back and checked it, and it said, he did have someone that he was giving it to, so he qualified on everything, but he said he plays a lot and everything there. So congrats to Ryan. Anyway, shout out to Ryan. Ryan won the annual membership, the 509. It's $5.99 retail, but he's going to get everything, all sports. So Ryan, reach out to me or the SHIPIT Nation X account, and you guys can follow it there. We're going to have a ton more giveaways. Like I said, MLB's back, MLB only. That stuff launches tomorrow. We've got, when we get to 7,000, going to be doing a bunch more giveaways upcoming, but congrats to Ryan. Just to keep it moving, though, we'll go to the 6K range. I guess I didn't have much else there. I think the 7Ks, you kind of covered what I was looking at. I think, realistically, some of those guys will be interesting. I was going to say in that 7.3 to 7.6 range, because does Akshay steal some from Taylor Moore? And in the end, Taylor Moore actually is a little bit better. Or does Luke List pick up some because people agree with you and all of that? And we're Mondo's in here. We're trying to be one for the people. Says, have you ever played with Baddeley? Have you played with Aaron?
No. I've played with a couple tour guys, never with Bads.
Any that you can mention or any stories?
Yeah, I've played, let's see. I played with Zach Blair at U.S. Open qualifying. I played with Denny McCarthy at U.S. Open qualifying, Billy Hurley at U.S. Open qualifying. I played with Tom Whitney on or Tom Lovelady on a mini tour event in Florida. I'll tell you the best story that I have, I think, is in U.S. Open sectionals. I was playing with Zach Blair. And I was playing right behind Troy Merritt, Tony Finau, and Jamie Sedlowski, the long drive guy. And this was probably 5 years ago, something like that. So this was before Tony Finau was Tony Finau, but we knew he was going to be great. He just wasn't exempt yet into the U.S. Open. But we knew how long he was already. And so the 10th hole, we're about to start our second 18 of the day. The 10th hole, the tee box is right next to the putting green. There's a top tier of the putting green that is immediately next to the scoring tent on 10. So we're 10 minutes from teeing off. So I'm just up at that corner of the putting green watching the guys tee off. And there's this huge wind coming in off the left. And the fairway, there's a big plateau type hill on the left side, then feeds all the way down to the right. And Finau blasts one to the top of the hill. And the scorer looks over me and goes, I haven't seen anyone get to the top of the hill this afternoon. Sedlowski comes up, the long drive guy. He tees off. You could hear the ball whistle through the air over our heads. Okay. Unbelievable. And flew the entire hill in the air, 60 yards in the air beyond Tony Finau. And he shot 78 because he just couldn't do anything after that. But man, I will never forget the sound of that golf ball. Holy hell, that was something.
That's the best part. When somebody's good, when you hear it come out, it almost takes off like a jet because it's goes all the way up with it. So that's awesome, man. Someone asked, was it Troy Merritt flow chart week that week? I always love my guy Merritt. If he's in the field and he's cheap and it's a birdie fest, I think you should get in on the action. But let's talk about the 6K range. You talked about already some of the guys would be over-owned. I mentioned earlier that this 6K, actually really all of it, 6 to 6.9 this week, a lot of them could have been 7K. It's just they cut the 7K range off at 18 guys. So quick thoughts on this 6K range, and then we'll have a discussion about the 6 and 5s to round it out.
Yeah, honestly, one thing that I've been toying with is the idea that you probably can play Scottie in single entry, even if you think he's going to be 70% owned, because there are a number of guys in this range that do have positive GPP scores for us that we know, look, Knapp might be 7%, he might be 20%. Akshay Bhatia might be 9%, he might be 15%. We can be pretty damn sure that these 6K guys are going to be 3% or 5%, and they're not going to be double digits. So right. Robert McIntyre stands out to me. Silverman, Bud Cauley, Matthew Neesmith. There are a lot of names. I'd even say Garrett Kigo, Pat's guy, Sung Hyun Kim. You could even take a risk on Dunlap, which I'm going to do an MME for sure. There are a number of guys here who probably should be 5%. And they're going to be 2%. And so at least in MME, they're easy guys to take chances on.
Yeah, I like that call. The Dunlap one is interesting. Obviously a winner already this season as an amateur. So that's kind of crazy. But some of the other stuff down here, I've heard some talks about Gotterup. I guess if you could check these guys, so it's kind of a fun way to do it. But Gotterup is one. Who's the guy who said, Bramlett? I think you talked to him already, but I just wanted to get a double check on him because he's $100 more than Silverman. And then interesting take, but just a quick conversation around Peter Malnati coming off the win. How does that shake out? How do you see that stuff too? So go ahead on those three.
I definitely say this is one of the few things that Justin and I, my co-host again on Pro V Pro, that we tend to disagree with. He doesn't like playing guys after win. I love doing it. I don't know that I'll go to Malnati here, but if I don't, it's not because he won last week. It's just because I don't think he's as good as the finish that he's had recently. But man, they're tough to ignore. So I'll definitely be overweight in MME, not going there in single entry. You also mentioned Bramlett, who appears to be one of the more popular guys in this range, but it's not like he's going to be crazy owned, and he does project well for us. I also like the fact that he's a guy who typically outperforms his real life leaderboard position in DraftKings points just because he makes a lot of birdies.
Yeah.
And who's you also mentioned Gotterup.
Yeah, just Gotterup was one that was mentioned. And I know Mayo liked him today too. And he's 6,100. So he's sort of at the bottom there. I guess there's some Michael Kim love if you want to compare those two, Gotterup and Michael Kim, to round it out.
The only thing I like about Gotterup is the distance. He's a very similar player, I think, to Garrick Higo, with the exception that Higo's a better putter. So I'd prefer Higo there. He's also, I think, going to be slightly lower owned than Gotterup. Michael Kim, slightly positive GPP score, so solid there. He's got good projections. He doesn't necessarily like fit the course fit bill in that he's not long off the tee, but he's one of the more solid all-around players in this price range, so you can definitely go to him as well.
Yeah, and if you give any points in the scores for X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, love that he gives out there lately. Yeah. He's been on fire, those threads and the posts and stuff that he puts out. So love to see that. The interview that Mayo did with him was awesome as well. I'm sure you love that. I'm guessing you took it in as a pro golfer to watch and see just him, how he talked about it. You don't see enough of that stuff. So love to see that kind of angle of approach. Let's move on. Let's finalize in this 5K range. I know we're at an hour. We always try and keep it under an hour, but don't mind this because we went into some other different topics that I think people enjoyed and liked. There's still lots of people here watching. Again, if you're just joining us, you've been here a while, do us that favor, hit that like button. It does help us out. Grow the channel from the subscribe button. That's free to do, and more shows like this will come your way. The more we grow, the more we show. I always say it that way. We can do more shows, all of that stuff, and get more fun guests on for you. Robbie Shelton was popping up at the top. I think some people are bringing up him. I know you brought up your Albatross earlier. Maybe that's why. Even the PGA Tour has like a new person running it. You can tell, and they called it Albatross and not Double Eagle. So you love to see that. There's going to be a lot of guys that don't really fit the course setup here, but then some people will just pop because they're bombers, different stuff like that. Who are some of these guys in the 5Ks? And then curious if you have any takes on just how they've done this pricing, because how many this week? Let me see. 63 guys just get thrown in the bottom of this field. It's like whatever, but any quick takes on that as well? Maybe more, actually. 67.
I'll start with, I love the change that they made to the pricing. I think that it's opened up a lot of different types of builds. Like it used to be either stars and scrubs or balanced. And now I think there are a lot of different types of lineups that you can build where, going into the 5Ks once is like going into the 7Ks 3 times to save money or something like that, right? So you get a lot more variations of lineup types, which I really enjoy. I think it just adds to the puzzle of building a lineup each week. As far as individual players goes, Shelton does not rate very well. He just doesn't drive the ball well enough for us to like him. Dunlap is my guy in this range, as I mentioned. There are two things that I want to see from a really young player to believe that he can be a quality player from the get-go. That is, does he have speed off the tee, and can he make putts? Dunlap is one of the better putters in the field already, and we know he's got the speed off the tee. Like he was matching Sam Burns shot for shot in terms of ball speed off the tee in that event when he won it. So I really like his talent. I like the fact that his event-to-event standard deviation is super high so far, which of course you're going to get when he goes, win, dead last, whatever. I'm a believer in his talent. I think that he'll eventually be like a $7,800 player, not a $5,800 player, which is basically what we're looking for down here. There are a lot of guys like Johnny Vegas is an interesting one. He's so good off the tee that he's always going to rate kind of well for us, but then he's just downright terrible on and around the greens. The thing about Johnny, though, is when he plays well, he's making so many birdies that if he finishes 50th, he's probably 30th in DraftKings points. So you just have to kind of like plug your nose, close your eyes, and play him and hope that he makes the cut. And if he does, he's going to do pretty well. He's also, I think, therefore, a really good showdown target, even if you don't have the stomach to play him on main slate.
Yeah, one quick last thing I'll say just about the pricing, because you talked about it there without going too much into it, but like the Shelton thing, where maybe he's only 2 or 2.5%, but like when someone's already that, not saying it's too high already. Again, you can make an argument because it's nothing. There's 98% not playing, but I'm saying it's a setup of, that 2 can turn into 3 or 3.5 versus a guy like Dunlap. If you've got him at like 0.4 or 0.5, it's like, he's just, what's he going to go to? 0.8, 0.7? Like he's just not moving. And you can kind of get a better feel going in of saying, I feel better about playing this guy from this spot. That's kind of the setup I see.
Yeah, and not only that, but I'm also a big proponent of thinking about ownership not just in its raw sense, but in its like conditional sense. So, for example, who are the people who are playing Robbie Shelton? People playing Robbie Shelton are probably doing it to help fit Scottie Scheffler, right? So his ownership might be 2%, but if you're going to him because you have Scottie and you need savings, now your effective ownership might be more like 4 to 6% because everybody who is playing Scottie or everybody who is playing Robbie is also going to Scottie. So you don't care about his overall ownership. You care about his ownership among people who are playing Scottie.
Yeah, those it's some of the stacks, if you will, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like combo packs within it because it's like you said, how many people are playing Robbie? Well, it's 2%, but 90% of those people playing him are putting him with Scottie right away, and that's using that to make it work.
Yeah.
Not many people are playing him and going different. That's where the whole levels to the roster construction come in, or why I always say, like someone says, well, you can't just match the field on Scottie. And on paper, and for a beginning player coming in, starting out in PGA DFS, I think you should be looking to get leverage on like that exact example to say like you're in on Scottie, I get that, or you're out. But when you're talking about it where, okay, of the 40%, 80% of those lineups are good. That there's 20% that you can just throw out the window out of the gate. They're just built poorly, or there's too much chalk, or no real outs to the top for these top heavy fields. All of that stuff, you can actually find angles where you could come in with like 35% Scheffler, and someone say, well, you didn't even match the field. You're actually like slightly underweight. It's like, yeah, but I feel very confident about my builds. Or maybe your opposite percentage. You have 65 of Scottie. You've got your number. You're not locking, but you're overweight. You're good. And the other 35% you're building are lineups like that, where most people who are using Bramlett or Shelton or someone down there are putting Scottie. You're looking to see what's the best Bramlett lineup without Scottie for me. What's the best Shelton lineup without Scottie? How can I make this work? And what does that really look like? So awesome stuff, man. I'll let you take it away. Anything final that you have before we get out of here? I know this went a little bit longer, but definitely appreciate you hopping in, stepping in for us this week. We can do more shows like this in the future. I think the people liked it, and I had a ton of fun just being able to pick your brain on some of these thoughts as well, both real golf and PGA DFS combined. Awesome stuff.
I appreciate it. Look, I knew we were going to have a lot of fun today because I think one thing that you guys do really well here at SHIPIT is you're always teaching people how to become better. You're teaching them how to fish. You're not just giving the plays, and that's something we care about a lot at FTN too. So not surprised that we had a really good time on this show. Hopefully we have some more opportunities to do the same thing. As far as FTN goes, I think, look, the biggest thing going on is it's baseball season. So fantasy baseball product at FTN is phenomenal. Vlad Sedler does an unbelievable job with the product. He brought in a ton of fantastic talent. We're going to have a weekly projection system built from our FTN data baseball projection system, which drastically outperformed Vegas and a lot of the other projection systems that exist on the market last season. Hopefully we can do the same sort of thing this year. And then, like I said, pick'em games are becoming a bigger and bigger part of our process. So anyone who's big on prize picks, underdog, sleeper, any of those stuff, and you want to become better at building your own slips and enjoying the building process. Because, like, look, all of us who are playing DFS, who are drafting best ball teams, like, we enjoy the process of building lineups, of drafting, of building these prize picks plays. It's not just about, tailing winning plays. We want to actually have the fun of building it. So we offer some really good stuff at FTN for that. And then, of course, if you're interested in the PGA stuff, go check that out as well. And then finally, football season's right around the corner. So check out FTN Fantasy for all the dynasty stuff, rookie grades, things like that, draft previews, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and let the people know where they can find you as well. X, Twitter, whatever. Everyone has their own name for they hold on to it or they'll slide with the new one. But XFK Twitter, as Elon himself called it. What's your handle on there?
It's always going to be Twitter for me at AlexBlicka1, and you can use promo code FTN March for 35% off of anything on the FTN site.
Yeah, definitely check it out. Nice complimentary piece. You can put it with all the stuff that we've got going on. I put up there earlier. We didn't really embed it as well, but I did want to show it. Like the projections ownership are one thing. The GPP and cash scoreboards, these are sort of like if you have no time, it's going to be people that are playing full time, diving into this stuff, getting it ready for you. But the stack rankings, the pitcher rankings for sure, two really good ones from last season. The hitter rankings are there as well. And then the advanced starting lineups page where you can go in and break it all down is almost like the Stone, but for MLB. So PGA's back. You can get in the streets for PGA. You can blend them both. You can use code HOOP15 if you want to get 15% off the all access. That'll take it down to just under $2 a day to get all the sports. But if you want MLB only, we did start it off today. We've got the $14 a week, no Discord. Remember with that, monthly is $33 with the code MLB15, and the season is $195 with the code MLB15. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to Alex again. Appreciate you stepping in and hopping in and doing the show with me. We'll do another one in the future. It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys all for watching. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.